So far, we've seen that arrays respond to several different methods, including length, last, and slice. As you might imagine, they respond to a lot of other methods as well. And as usual, the documentation is a great source for more information. Let's take a quick look. Just search for Ruby arrays, and then I like to go to the one that's closest to the current version, or the one I'm using at least, and then maybe switch it up here. This doesn't really matter, as I've mentioned before with strings. The array methods are quite stable. They haven't changed in quite a while. We saw in the last chapter that strings respond to an include ? Method that tests for the inclusion of a substring. Let's see if arrays have that. That would be really useful. There it is. So, well, actually, there we go. So it does exist. Let's remind ourselves what A is. Okay. Let's see if it includes the number 42. This should be true, and it is. What about the string foo? Nope. So this is really nice. This is an intuitive way to test for element inclusion in arrays. There are lots more. Let's take a look at sort. You can see here, you can sort an array. Another thing you can do is reverse an array. Let's take a look at those. So A, again, is this set of numbers. Now, in the old days, everyone learning computer programming had to learn how to implement sorts. Sorting is really important, but it's also really hard. So for example, when I studied C programming in college, we spent quite a bit of time learning how to write sorts in C. But now I can just do this. Now this isn't entirely fair to C, because in fact Ruby is written in C. So this is a custom sort written in C, and so we get to be the beneficiaries of the work that the Ruby core developers did in making that sort good. By the way, it's worth noting that this is the right behavior. If you've studied JavaScript, and specifically if you went through Learn Enough JavaScript to be Dangerous, you may recall that in JavaScript, the default sort is, quote, alphabetical, so that 17 comes before 8, which is just terrible. In Ruby, it does in fact sort things numerically by default. It's also worth noting, also unlike JavaScript, that sorting an array doesn't change the array. You can see that it's the same as it was before. If you want to sort it in place so that it actually mutates the array, you can do it like this. A.sort bang. And in fact, if we go back to the documentation, if you look closely here, there's actually a reverse bang. We'll see that in a second. Here we go, sort. So there's sort and then there's sort bang. So the way that works is that A.sort bang sorts the array and mutates it. As hinted in this pattern of sort and sort bang and reverse bang, this is actually part of a common theme. So let's do this. A.reverse reverses the array, 99, 42, 17, 8. But, as before, A is unchanged. If we do A.reverse bang, it reverses it and mutates it. So in plain Ruby, it's almost always the case that a method like sort or reverse that performs an operation on the array doesn't mutate the array, but the corresponding bang method does. Just as a warning, because I know a lot of people who learn Ruby also do Rails programming, this convention isn't exactly the same in Rails. Ruby on Rails often follows the convention that the regular version of the method, say the save method, which saves to the database, returns false if it fails, and the corresponding bang method, like save bang, raises an exception, which is to say it creates an error. But in plain Ruby, this is the consistent pattern, and it's really nice because it means that every time you have a method that changes some sort of object, you can often infer that there exists a corresponding bang method. Let's look at a couple more methods. We're going to look at push and pop. Here's push, and here, and pop. There. It's good getting used to just navigating the documentation like this. I'm not giving you quite enough time to read it, but now you know where to go to read more about it. Let's take a look here. So the push method is essentially the same as appending. So a.push, say the number 6, pushes that number 6 onto the end of the array. See if the append method works. There are lots of aliases in Ruby where two words correspond to the same method. Ah, look at that. It actually worked. So pushing and popping are usually paired together as methods, but in fact Ruby does have an alias for push, which is append. I mentioned pop. Let's see how it works. We talked about finding the last element in an array with a.last or a of -1. A.pop returns the last element and removes it at the same time, like that. Now we've seen here that both push and append do the same thing, but in fact neither is particularly common. The most common way to push onto the end of an array in Ruby is using what's called the shovel operator. It's 2 left angle brackets. So here's our array. We can push on, say, a string like this. And in fact, we can even use multiple shovel operators chained together to push multiple elements on at the same time. This sort of shovel operator chaining is really common in idiomatic Ruby, and it can be kind of hard to Google, like, what is that thing? Well, it's called the shovel operator, and now you know how to use it. One final method I'd like to talk about is essentially the reverse of split, which is how we started this chapter. It's called join. Let's redefine A. Let's use 3 strings and then something that isn't a string. So ant, bat, cat, and then the number 42. The join method converts this array into a string, like this. Without an argument, it joins on the empty string. That's the same as this. But we can also join on other things, say, comma space, or anything else. It's also worth noting that even though we started with a number here, Ruby automatically converts it to the corresponding string value when it does the join.